gentlemen, welcome to Dialogue. I'm Wang Mengmang in Beijing. The British capital has entered history by electing a Muslim of immigrant descent as its new mayor. Sadiq Khan's win has been described as a victory over Islamophobia, and many argue that Khan should see himself as a role model for millions of Muslims living in Europe. So what was the reason for Mr. Khan's landslide victory? And just how much influence and power does the new mayor actually have anyway? Will his election change in any way the political map of Europe? And will there be a knock-on effect which could combat the wave of anti-refugee sentiment sweeping Europe? In the studio to discuss all that are John Ross, a senior fellow at the Chongyang Institute of Renmin University, who was also director of economic policy for the first London mayor, Ken Livingstone, and also Cui Hongjian, director of European studies at the China Institute of International Studies. But let's now take a look at this background.
Side by side with the Dean of Southwark Cathedral, Andrew Nunn, Sadiq Khan strides into a bastion of British Christianity.
As Mayor Sadiq Khan begins his term of office, our first Muslim mayor, something of which
applause echoed around the cathedral before the Reverend Nunn could continue with his thoughts.
Something, sir, that we as a Christian community are very proud of.
Khan won with more than 1.3 million votes, hailed by the BBC as the largest personal mandate of any politician in UK history. Current rebuke to weeks of electioneering by the UK's ruling Conservative Party that attempted to use Khan's religion as a weapon against him. His main rival, Zach Goldsmith, accused by some, even in his own party, of attempting to link Khan with Islamic extremism. After the count, Khan hailed his electoral landslide as a victory of hope over fear.
I hope that we will never be offered such a stark choice again. Fear does not make us safer, it only makes us weaker. And the of fear is simply not welcome in our city.
In the event, Khan couldn't have triumphed on Muslim support alone. To take over at City Hall, he won significantly more than 50% of the vote in a city which has a Muslim population of just 13%. It's here, though, in the corridors of Britain's House of Commons, that the difficult questions will be asked of the country's ruling Conservatives. The UK President already under pressure from Muslims within the ranks of his own party to explain a faith-based political strategy that badly backfired. Richard Bestick, CCTV, London.
And now we're going to spend the next half hour discussing the new mayor's political credentials and priority, and more importantly, what does it mean? What does his election mean to Europe, to the UK? And gentlemen, welcome to Dialogue. So let's begin with the complicated mayor system in London. Well, the mayor of London is the mayor of the entirety of Greater London, which also includes the City of London, which also has its own ceremonial Lord Leader, and each London borough has its own ceremonial mayor, except for the 4 boroughs that have their own elected mayor. So it all sounds highly confusing. Can we begin by my asking you to spell out what kind of powers or influence the mayor of London actually has?
Yeah, it's actually extremely simple. All the power lies with the major mayor. The mayor of the City of London is a post to really promote London's financial centre, and the local mayors, many of them are ceremonial. There are a few that have local district responsibilities, but the big decisions, that is the control of the transport system, the control of the policing system, the control of housing, the promotion of the city, are all held by the mayor of Greater London, that is Sadiq Khan. So it's actually very simple.
What are his campaign promises that will really become his political priorities?
Well, the most important of all is to control and to freeze transport fares. Transport fares in London are extraordinarily expensive. I mean, for Chinese listeners, it costs 200 yuan for me to go to work and to come back every day. And that even London salaries are not that much higher. They're much higher than they are, for example, in Paris or in Frankfurt or other centres, because the Conservative Party has a policy of not subsidising fares, because every public transport system in the world has to be subsidised. And therefore his most important pledge of all is to keep fares down. Second after that will be the question of housing, in which the mayor doesn't have quite such direct powers, but nevertheless a responsibility. And then the perennial problem in London is always the question of the police, because not merely the problems of crime, but there's the threat of terrorism and so on. So then there's the promotion of London, because it's one of the most visited capitals in the world and one of the biggest inward investment destinations. Those are his real responsibilities.
Well, actually, a lot of discussions surrounding this new mayor is his Muslim background. And we know that a commentary in German news magazine Der Spiegel describes Mr. Khan's win as a victory over Islamophobia and says London is breaking new ground. And the magazine says that the mayoral election shows that London is more liberal, clever, and tolerant than the conservative mudslingers who like to think it says. Now, given the strong anti-Islamic sentiment sweeping across Europe and the waves of refugees from Syria, other Arab nations, and North African countries, are you surprised by the strength of Mr. Khan's victory?
That is not so surprised, because yes, we need to understand the background now in Europe, especially the anti-Muslim especially groups or some forces in some countries. But I think that this time for London and for the victory of Mr. Sadiq Khan is very, very special, because as we know, the London city is very special in Europe. It's a big city, and also more and more migration live into this city. According to the updated data in London, now the demographic structure is nearly 0.5% of London people are from other countries. They are migration or the second or third generation of migration. So I think yes, the victory is important for London city, but I don't think it's so significant for the other part of European countries, because as we understand that this is the only international big city, and once there are some other, serious victory of Muslim people, they won some position like governor or like the mayor in other European countries. I think that would be the time for us to say, okay, something changed.
So London is no doubt a culturally diverse city, and it has a great deal of cultural tolerance. But also, Mr. Khan is by no means the first Muslim in charge of a European city. Let's not forget, Muslims have been running cities in Spain, Greece, the Balkans, Sicily, not forgetting Istanbul, of course. So does the fact that the British media are making such a big deal on the new mayor's Muslim background say something about the media than what it says about Mr. Khan himself?
Yes, I think that it is. London is very specific. My honest opinion is that London is the most international city in the world. Just objectively, I'm a Londoner, but I don't mean it in that way. I mean, there's 300 languages spoken every day in London. It is a gigantic international financial centre in what is now a medium-sized economy. You make your career in the financial services in London by your international operations, not primarily by your domestic operations. You frequently have 50 or 60 nationalities working in the same building in the financial district. A huge percentage of the population born from abroad, and it's a very unusual city. I happen to love it very much, but it is not similar to all other European cities, that's true.
All right. What do you see as difference?
It's totally international character. Frankfurt, which is London's rival in financial terms, is really a European capital. Paris is a French capital. None of them have the international global reach. So it tells us a great deal about the tolerance of Londoners. I think Londoners were absolutely not interested in this campaign about the fact that he was a Muslim. He's a very reasonable person, has no association with Muslim extremism, whatever. And I think that the campaign against him completely backfired on the grounds that the attempt to portray him as a Muslim extremist was completely untrue. And therefore the population didn't go along with this. It shows something about Londoners that they were not swayed by this. In some other cities, it may have had some influence, but they just didn't care. They're interested in the transport fares. That was what they were really concerned about.
So does it really matter which religious grouping they actually belong to? Why are people so concerned about the Muslim background?
Yeah, I think that another reason for why London City is so specific, just like those mentioned, that because as we know, Mr. Khan is the third mayor since director election started in the year of 2008. I mean, for this 2000. I'm sorry, for this London mayor. So I think that's the reason why there are so big influence of this election for media, for average people. But I think that, yes, I agree with John that London is very special. And also, as we know, even compared with other part of Europe, UK is also specific. It's a politic system, very special. Because if we understand the recent trend of this political change in UK is more and more flattening, I mean, in a political system, which means that there will be more and more power for local government compared with the central government. So I think that's the reason why. But compared with some other European countries.
Getting deeper into the political system in London, yes. I'd like to know more about this. Why are we seeing such a big deal of media frenzy going on about his background? And is the fact that we're even debating this topic today says something about the modern European perception of the Muslim identity?
Well, I think that the media got into a frenzy and had no effect on the electorate. The reason the media got into a frenzy was the Conservative Party tried to run a campaign on the grounds it was a Muslim. The London population was interested in transport, was interested in housing. It was not concerned about this.
They're more concerned about the real changes.
They're concerned. There's the famous phrase of Bill Clinton, it's the economy, stupid. In my experience, and I've been in a lot of elections, that it applies to almost every election. And therefore Sadiq Khan put forward a clear, very focused campaign. I think it was an excellently run campaign. In order to be clear, I supported him, but that does not give it. But it was a very focused campaign. And therefore this attempt to create frenzy was ignored by largely by the population. It says something about this situation in Europe, that you have this type of anti-Muslim sentiment, but Londoners were not swayed by it. I mean, not merely did he win, he didn't win by a small amount, he won by what is in modern terms an absolute landslide victory. I believe only Ken Livingstone in his first election, if my memory is correct, got a higher percentage of the vote. So Londoners were completely unimpressed.
Well, do you think, I mean, what kind of influences, what kind of effects do you think that Mr. Khan's victory will have on the political system, not just in London, not just in the UK, but maybe does it apply to the rest of Europe?
Well, I think it's going to be a question he now faces. I know this, I was for 8 years in that office. It's a huge, not at the office of the mayor, but I mean working in the mayor's office, right? It is a huge administrative challenge. You have I think, the largest transport system in Western Europe. You have one of the largest police forces in Europe. You have a budget for promoting the city which is millions of dollars. The mayor is de facto a chief executive. That's why the mayor always has to resign from Parliament, because it's impossible to combine that job. It's like being the CEO of a big company. And the GDP of London is bigger than most European countries, so it's a big job.
Well, Mr. Tsui, your expertise is on European studies. So do you think that Mr. Khan's victory will really lead to worldwide consensuses, or things will quieten down after the initial euphoria has subsided?
Exactly. I think regard to this event, we need to have a very, very proper position to look at it. Firstly, just like John mentioned, that if we look at the campaign, the main issue is about the city, okay, how to manage the big city. So anyway, it's just he's just a mayor of the city. Of course, maybe in the future he will become the political superstar in firstly Labour Party, and then UK, and then Europe, but not now. So secondly, yes, it gives some message to UK, to other part of Europe. I think I prefer to use the word as a balance, because in recent years we heard so much about this kind of extreme, populist or some other will point on this migration or refugee issue. But indeed, still, I mean, for the mainstream in some European countries, including UK, some especially liberalism, they still want to have a kind of balance, say that, okay, for Europe, for UK, we need it open enough to migration, to other part of the world. So I think, yes, this time, if we just look at this political background, not only in UK and also for European countries, we can find, yeah, it's an effort from the mainstream, from the media, to keep a balance on this public opinion.
But it would not be easy for Mr. Khan to keep one side of the balance. But we're going to take a short break. Gentlemen, you're watching Dialogue, and we'll be back right after this. Welcome back to Dialogue. Now let's continue our discussion with our studio guests. We'll be talking about what kind of man Mr. Khan is, what will be his political priorities, and of course, what does it mean for him to carry through on his campaign promises. So, Mr. Ross, I'd like to ask you this. Is Mr. Khan generally considered a man, a force to be reckoned with?
Yeah, it's anybody who gets that job. Firstly, you have to beat very tough opponents. It's one of the most wanted jobs in Britain. He had to beat cabinet member in order to get the nomination for the Labour Party. He had to beat a member of the shadow cabinet, so it's difficult to get the nomination. Then it's a very tough campaign. You had David Cameron campaigning against you in the House of Commons. Nobody who is anything other than very experienced and very capable is going to get that job. The real challenge is that it's a different job to being an MP. Mr. Khan, who I greatly admire incidentally, has a background as a lawyer and as a member of Parliament. But now he's going to take over a management job, because that's really what the mayor does. He spends most of the day, frankly, managing things, taking decisions about the police, taking about transport, and that's what he'll do. His whole track record and competence shows that he'll be able to do it. But nevertheless, it is a big job. That's why when people want it, it's, as it says, he has a bigger personal mandate than any other politician in Britain, and that will make him a major figure in the Labour Party as well, certainly.
And whenever we talk about politicians, we talk about their policies in comparison with their predecessors. For example, the first two mayors of London, Ken Livingstone and Boris Johnson, they've carried out specific reforms, different initiatives to make changes to the transportation system, to housing, and of course to improving air quality, steering the UK, steering London out of the economic crash. So, do you think that the new mayor, Mr. Khan, will be able to carry on their legacies and take them further?
Exactly. I think that because now it's just a very, very beginning, for Mr. Khan to become the mayor of London. I think that why most of London people choose this gentleman become the next mayor. I think firstly they believe Mr. Khan can do something. He has a capability to do something. For example, how about the transport issue? Because if we understand that Mr. Khan used to be the Minister of Transport in the Mr. Gordon Brown's cabinet some years ago. So we understand that, okay, because people, especially for average people, they believe that Mr. Khan has experience, capability to deal with a very, very difficult transport issue in London. Secondly, Mr. Khan has a background as a lawyer, specialized in the human rights affairs. So I think it's good, message to some, especially migration group or some lower class people. They believe that, okay, Mr. Khan can do something more fair or justice thing like that. So I think now the problem is, as we know that as a big city, London is keeping growth, growth because according to the statistic, in another maybe 20 years, there will be more than 10 million people living in London. So we can understand that how big issue, how difficult for this daily issue, for example, the transport and housing, or just like those mentioned, the security issue. Because as we know, now London, as a big city in Europe, certainly was targeted by the ISIL or some other terrorism group. So I think, yeah, it will give a big test to Mr. Khan. Now the problem is, the question is, even London is very, very specific in UK, but it's still part of UK. So which means that once Mr. Khan wants to resolve so many problems at the same time, certainly he need also get some more help from the government of UK or maybe some other part of the political system in UK.
And Mr. Khan is going to be under a lot of pressure to keep the capital safe, especially after the terrorist attacks on Paris. So what constraints is he under to really keep the capital safe?
Well, you need two things from the point of view of just keeping the capital safe. First, you need a highly specialised police force. One of the things, again, because I was working with the police on a daily basis, is a great admiration for their
He's about an
technical
improvement in the
capabilities.
emergency services sector?
Yes, but if you take specifically the security question, it's the competence of the police, but secondly, the cooperation of the population. You see, you cannot make a bomb by yourself. Somebody knows about it. This is one of the reasons that Islamophobia is not very sensible. If the Islamic population believes that the whole rest of the community is against them, they will protect their own and they won't give you information. If they believe that the Islamic community is being treated fairly, then they will give communication to the police. And the police therefore rely greatly on the intelligence they get from the Islamic community. That's why Islamophobia is not merely a very morally bad policy, but it's also a very dangerous policy from a security point of view.
Are you saying that people's sense of satisfaction with their lives will to some extent help the police to crack down on terrorism?
If they believe that they're being treated fairly, then they will report what they regard as suspicious activities. If they believe that they're not being treated fairly, then they will not give information to the police. And therefore the police requires good intelligence, particularly coming from communities that are affected, such as the Islamic community, and excellent technical skills. And these are the two things which keep the community safe. On that, Mr. Khan's position will obviously aid the situation because he's a Muslim himself. He's a strong opponent of Islamic, or any form of terrorism at all, not merely Islamic terrorism, any terrorism. And therefore that will help, I'm sure, to get information which comes from any suspicious activities which go on.
Right. Is there a likelihood that his victory to become the mayor of London to some extent will turn the terrorists away? I mean, the Islamic terrorists away?
I would think that an Islamic terrorist will consider him a traitor. Because they...
Instead of role models for millions
No,
of...
I'm afraid that they will regard, if you take the terrorists who have a very warped view of the world, the fact that he stands for a liberal approach to the world, he supports same-sex marriage, for example, and he's against any form of discrimination against anybody at all. I mean, the Muslim community is only one. There are Sikhs, Jews, Christians, all sorts of people in London, right? He'll be seen as fair, and the Muslim extremists won't like him for that reason, whereas the majority of the population will like him for that reason.
Let me just jump in here and ask you this. Mr. Tsui was talking about the balance between the new mayor, his Islamic credentials, and the terrorism. Would you elaborate on that, and would you agree with Mr. Ross?
Yeah, exactly. I think I still think that to make sure the safety of London is not the job. I mean, Mr. Khan could finish it because London city is not an isolating city from other part of UK or Europe. So I think, especially when it faces a threat from terrorism, still the UK central government and even the cooperation between UK and some other European countries would be the priority. And of course, Mr. Khan can do some, something details, for example, to help some, I think his big role would be, because he is from Muslim, he can help the kind of integration of different group. And maybe Mr. Khan could be very, very helpful to help, to get rid of this root or the soil of this, terrorism in London or some other part of Europe. But I think for the security issue itself, the potential space of Mr. Khan's job is very, very limited.
Well, a lot of people tend to relate to Mr. Khan's Islamic credentials to the ethnic divide in not only in London but also in the UK. So how big is the ethnic divide?
Well, there are a small handful of rather repellent extremists in every community, I'm afraid, in the world, without exception, in every country in the world. One of the things I say, I'm against racism. I found out all races contain and nations contain equal number of idiots, right? But the majority of the population is really rather tolerant because it is very diverse. I mean, one of my Chinese friends made a funny remark to me. She said, it's the only place in the world when I was going down the street, people assumed I was a Londoner and asked me for directions about how to get to local places, because that's the way the situation is. So there is a small fringe of extremists, but there is a great deal of tolerance. And the fundamental thing is that you should be able to lead your life in the way that you want to, provided you don't interfere with anybody else. You should be able to do what you want. That's the general approach.
And gentlemen, now looking forward, every mayor has the right to appoint 2 political advisors and up to 10 staff, giving them a chance to surround themselves with trusted lieutenants and a chance to hit the ground and running. So what kind of talents do you think Mr. Khan will have to need in order for him to carry through on his campaign promises?
Yeah, exactly. I think that firstly, because now Mr. Khan won already, I think something will be changed. For example, because now for Mr. Khan, I think the first thing for him is he should get out from the campaign as fast as possible, and then he needed to get along with. Of course, he has his new administration organization, or he need to get some, very, very good cooperation with other colleagues in Labour Party, because now, as we know, that it looks like he has some problem with the leader of the Labour Party, right. And also, yes, indeed, even he is from very, very average people, but indeed, I think he should get along with the traditional political system of UK once he wants to do something more.
Right, and his victory ends 8 years of Conservative leadership at City Hall. Going forward, what do you think will be his major achievements and challenges? Very briefly, Mr.
It'll be whether he can deliver on his transport pledges, and whether he can deliver on the housing, and whether he can keep the communities there. I'm absolutely sure he can keep the communities together. He's been a civil rights lawyer and someone concerned with this for decades. He's going to not have a problem with that. The big test will be the management. And the famous thing that you can be confronted with a crisis. There are things out of your control. The economy could crash, you could have a terrorist attack, and the ability of the mayor is to think very quickly about how to deal with big problems.
Right, and he'll need the next 6 years to fulfill his political will and wisdom. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your thoughtful discussion on this. Really appreciate it. With that, we come to the end of this edition of Dialogue. I'm Wang Mengmang in Beijing. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.